Thank you so much, Dr. Abdal Hakim, for such lost forward, for such insightful, and there are so many wisdoms imparted by Dr. Abdal Hakim, alhamdulillah. So we have about 30 minutes for Q&A because we don't have any wireless microphone. So I need any one of you who has question to come forward.
Salam. Yeah, that's a good and practical question. How can we take this idea of a spiritually driven, not nationalism, but patriotism, Hubb al-Watan, and use it in very multiple, diverse modern societies, perhaps secular ones, such as Australia, which is where the sister is from? One way of answering that would be to say that if it can be done in the apparently very un-Muslim environment of 14th, 15th century Java, that the people who came and the people who converted continued to love their culture and were part of the Muslimness of any other place, then it can be done in Australia or Britain or even the United States, despite its current official barbarisms. There were being Chinese Muslim, there were being Malay Muslim, and regional variations as well. I'm not suggesting that culture should be coterminous with the boundaries of a nation state. That's not the way Islam has historically worked. Regarding your earlier question, which is harder, where does one draw the line when you encounter practices that seem to be on the very boundaries of what the Sharia could abide, particularly when you're dealing with areas of the supernatural, spirit possession? I mean, these things are known to be a reality in the Sharia and in Islamic doctrine, but very often indigenous cultures manipulate occult consciousnesses in ways which are not monotheistic and exploitative and to do with envy, human manipulation, and it can often be a very ugly and unclean thing. That should be approached preferably not by the mufti, first of all, but by the sheikh who understands those things. Because it's often the case that people who have some kind of charismatic gift for communicating with unseen worlds are capable of turning that gift to good as well as to negative purposes. And in Indonesia and elsewhere, I have seen people who are making a lot of money out of spirit possession and state healing and things. But they're not intrinsically bad people, it's just that they haven't had the right kind of guidance to enable them to see that this is something you should be doing for free, and something that should always begin with the Quran, and you should always maintain gender boundaries and the other sort of Sharia frontiers, and do it for what is khair rather than just because people are envious of their mother-in-law's baby or whatever might be the issue at stake. So not just to suffocate those mysterious gifts of apparently peering into the veil, but to help people to direct them towards what is good. And then, if they don't, then there may well be scope for muftis, and the Sharia is not something which we can reinvent. There's certain boundaries of practices which are not acceptable. There may be a case for taking firmer action against people who are exploiting people for their own ends through some kind of manipulative occult power which they claim.
This is more a comment for the sister than the first question than anything else, but I'm certain you have something to say about it. I'm actually from Australia, and I've had several years of being engaged in this, essentially interfaith dialogue with someone. I really think one of the best things in an environment like Australia is to actually reach out and talk to people of other faiths, because they are just as much under threat by the modern world and by the forces of darkness, which sadly are running Australia at the moment, as Islam and Muslims are. And you might be surprised, because when I first got involved, the Christians and Jews and so on, they were people of my vintage, and they were extremely surprised when Muslims came along to their functions and they were people of your vintage. They could not believe that young people were active and interested in not only in their faith, but in talking to others. And from that, young Muslims have met young Christians and young Jews, and they are working and they are talking together. And I know from that a lot of not just interfaith dialogue, but interfaith activities are going on, where people have a project to do some good in the community, and it's not the Christians run it, and the Jews run it, or the Muslims run it, but they all get in and they all work and they all contribute. And doing good together is a very powerful way of getting to know one another. And I don't know how well you know the Australian situation, but there have been a few instances in Australia where we have extreme right-wing groups that attack Muslims, and the people have come to their defence between Jews and Christians because they realise that the message of hate that these people are putting out is just as dangerous to them.
Yeah, but that's more of a comment than a question, but I would support the idea. It's the kind of thing that culture, and even popular culture, can be very good at doing, rather than academic work. So there need to be more songs, more dramatisation, the revival of the wayang kulit and sort of modern forms of the wayang kulit, films, animation, novels, poetry, theatre. There's plenty of even modern platforms in which the story can get out. And it's a story that people are thirsty for, because it's about personalities, it's about sacrifice, it's about heroism, it's dramatic and beautiful stories. And it is the great epic narrative of this people, just as Homer was the great narrative of the Greeks. That's the story of the people of Nusantara, and it's an amazing story. So it's just through culture, through writing books for children, through writing novels, through events like this, that their memory can be perpetuated. And it's not just about information, but also about presenting it in such a way as to remind people of the divine through their lives. Because just mentioning the name of somebody who is particularly close to God has an effect in some mysterious way on people's hearts. Bidikrihim tanzil al-Rahmah, just by mentioning them, the Rahmah descends. And people need Rahmah nowadays. They've got everything else, but they haven't got what they really need.
Thank you. I think, Assalamu alaikum. I was exactly going to ask what Sidi Amran was asking. I'm just going to elaborate a bit. What would be comparable to what the Kamalat, for example, available on Wali Songo? And in what terms? And if there's something that you can elaborate on that, especially on the idea that the terms that you use in issue, it's a while, but that's something I'd like to elaborate on.
Yeah, I mean, it would be for you people who know what works in your environment to determine what cultural forms are going to succeed in conveying the essence of the tradition authentically while using modern methods. Some aspects of modern popular culture are so ego-driven by the lowest impulses of the human self and have so much anger in them that I don't think we can really mobilize them correctly. But there are many other things in people's traditional culture that hark back to an age when people somehow seem to be happier. If you listen to a lot of contemporary music, popular music, so much anger and unhappiness in it. If you listen to the songs that people were singing 100 years ago, they're kind of cheerful, same old subject, it's boy meets girl and whatever, but it's a lot more serene. So reaching back in time a little bit to that period is often more successful than using the very latest style, which is often abrasive and too linked to the almost suicidal darkness of a lot of modern youth culture, which is the youth culture that's about tattooing and piercing and addictive behaviour. There's a lot of that in the culture of youth nowadays. We can't use that because that's just darkness. And the Wali Songo, when they saw things like that in their own culture, they just suppressed it and they went with what they found that was luminous. So it's like picking the gold coins again. You have to find what's valuable and let it shine.
Well, yeah. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for the lecture. You made a point in passing about the Wali Songo, about the curiosity that's infused in the dawah, in the interaction of cultures and of different faiths. And in my own experience with dawah, I find that there's a paucity, there's a complete lack of curiosity from Muslims about different faiths. It's almost as if dawah becomes a form of just imposing one's own system without necessarily seeing where the other person's coming from. So I was wondering if you could speak more to that fact of curiosity-driven dawah and how that would be an impulse we can inculcate more among Muslims nowadays.
Well, da'wah that's based on discourtesy and arrogance isn't da'wah at all. It's something else. It's just kind of virtue signaling of some kind that indicates the psychic state of whoever's doing it. So much, for instance, of the legacy of Ahmad Didat is counterproductive because you don't attract people by insulting them, using disrespectful, offensive language in life of prayer, wherever it is, whether it's in our religious community or outside of it. It's all khair. Yeah. Yeah, the stories are cherished by the Javanese, are indicative of the memory of their karamat. I would say that it's not a matter of a particular miracle story, but essentially of the whole narrative that I've given of their spiritual greatness and their aristocratic eminence and their simultaneous concern to bring people of every conceivable background into the Deen of Islam and their istiqamah. I guess the most impressive thing about Sunan Kalijaga was probably his tahajjud, although we'll never get to see it. So the stories are great, but let's focus on the luminous spirits, because that's really what they were about.
Thank you. When I first met you, I remember you asked me how I became Muslim, and I said, well, I never thought I'd be part of an organized religion. And your response was, well, it's not that organized. And that's something I never forgot, because beneath the layer of dry British humor, I felt that there was a deeper statement about when a Westerner thinks of organized religion, we think of a church hierarchy and someone who claims, to represent God and the papacy and the whole priesthood. And for many of us that are drawn to Islam, we're actually drawn to the fact that Islam doesn't have all of that. So my question is that in traditional Muslim societies, there was room for local authorities to arise almost organically, that understood and fit into and were responding to and in a natural relationship with the local cultures and regions. And we've spoken a lot about the fact that we have this kind of global monoculture, but there's also, because of the interconnectivity, a kind of culturally predatory Islamic monoculture in certain segments of the society or certain countries. And so I'm curious about how that serves as a barrier for us to really see these traditions flourish in different regions that honor the local culture, especially also for us in Western countries which have a more shallow historical narrative of Islam than places like this, trying to navigate that.
Yeah, it's not an easy question. It's certainly the case that a certain type of fundamentalism, if you like, turns into essentially a sort of Arab nationalism, that everybody has to be Abdal this or Abdal that and wear Arabian clothes, even if they're living in a cold village in North Yorkshire. It becomes very, very strange. And also puts people off. Who wants to dress in cotton fold if you're living up a mountain in Wales? It just suggests that Islam isn't universal. But then if you go back to the same people and say, well, why don't you do something that shows that the Sunnah embraces local particularities? And in a place like England, they would say, well, does that just mean that I wear ordinary international clothes and feel like doing that? How can I engage with what's local when nobody has, say, dressed in a way that's indigenous and British since the 1950s or something, when people did wear duffel coats and smoke pipes and had tweed things and flat caps, and you could recognise an Englishman back then, but you can't now. Everybody is samey. And that's a good question. Mosque design is something similar. When we were considering what our new mosque in Cambridge should look like, we wanted it not to be something that was parachuted in from the Middle East or somewhere else, because that would send the wrong signal about our community's intentions towards its neighbours. But at the same time, how would you design a British mosque exactly, conserved, that should never be defined? Because whenever we define them, we run the risk of defining what we are not and excluding others. I think we should be as vague as possible in defining things like cultural identity. It's not like issues of Sharia or Kalam. The Urf and the Ada are very fluid and flexible things that have changed in the past, will change in the future, but as we have found them, and we should avoid trying to turn them into some kind of badge or ideology of belonging, because they're not for that.
So, a very popular discussion item at the moment is the role of women, and this is particularly popular in the secular sphere. For example, yesterday I attended a Global Transformation Forum, and somebody asked Jack Ma, he's a businessman, how do I become more successful or be as successful as you? And he said, employ more women. So yeah, even Jack Ma says that women has a very important role in business. But moving forward, what does Islam, and what you see particularly, the role of youth? Should Islam in the future be driven by youth, or should elders still dictate?
You mean specifically with reference to the gender question? Or is it a separate second question?
I was saying that what's the remark about gender being popular? Moving forward, what's the role of Islam in the elders still dictate youth in the future, or should the world be given by?
Well, the world, in our vision, should be driven by revelation and by God's law. Who interprets it is a detail. Generally, we have respected our elders because they have seen more of the world, and they're less likely to fall prey to certain passionate errors that can be the errors of youth, whether it be fanaticism for a particular sport or a technical device, or religious fundamentalism misdirected, unless there's an older generation that can wisely initiate the young into ways of directing their energies and their zeal correctly. Youth left to its own devices very often causes many of the misfortunes of the world. That Allah has given youth this tremendous hamas, this tremendous zeal, but the young have the right to expect from the older generation guidance that makes sense. Not just do this, do that, because I say so, but explanations. So the responsibility of the young is to recognize their limitations, and that the older people have seen more of the world than they have. The responsibility of the old is to make sure that what they say makes sense to the young, and that not just handing down instructions, but are giving them reasons for why certain relationships are healthy and others are unhealthy, why certain substances should be avoided, why certain kinds of music might damage your brain, whatever it is that they want to inculcate in them. They have to give reasons. And it may well be nowadays that the scriptural reasons aren't quite enough for a lot of young people, and they need explanations as well. And that's often where our ulama and our elders fall down, because the world of youth seems to be so different and changing so fast, and the problems amongst the young are so exponentially growing. At my university, we have maybe a quarter of our students with various mental health issues, and the number continues to grow. Old people often just don't understand their world and don't know how to help. So they have the responsibility to try and listen to them compassionately, non-judgmentally, and to give them the benefit of their wisdom, and to explain that a sober and God-oriented life is more likely to deliver the happiness that all human beings crave than the kind of life that might be recommended by the consumer culture of the day.